So we've been using Desmos all along, but we're going to do this activity completely using Desmos. And so again, we first want to identify our inputs and outputs. Um, the percentage of women age 65 or older living alone has been increasing since 1930, but has more recently taken a turn and is decreasing. So the following function was created to model the trends observed. So we have P of Y equals this function here, where P is the percent of women living alone. And since P is on the outside of the parentheses, we know that P is our output. We also know it's on the bottom of our table. All right, and then so our input is the Y, and because it's inside the parentheses, and Y is the number of years since 1930, it's also on the top of the table, so we know that what comes first on the table is our input as well. So I'm going to just label our graph. We're given a scale, given our axes, but just gonna label this for now. So Y equals the years since 1930, and P is the percent of women 65 and older living alone. Okay, so we've identified our inputs and outputs. We know where our axes, which one goes along the axes. Now we're going to go to Desmos, and we're going to have Desmos fill in our table. Again, as we've been doing all along, Desmos only understands X as the input letter, but it can have any output letter. So we're going to do, for this case, we're going to do P of Y, or a function name anyway, P of X equals, and then again, we got to be careful typing this in. And when we get to the raised, we can use our A to the B button. And we want to raise that to the third power. And we just click down or tap on it, or you can use the arrow key, also will move it for you. Then we have 0. Move it over, plus 0.016x. Again, we can use the A to the B button, or we can just say A squared because it is the squared term, plus 0.13x plus 8.93. And in line 2, we're going to create this table. So we're going to go again to the gear or the settings, and we're going to create a table, so convert to table. And I'm going to change these values this time. So I'm going to take 0, 30. I'm just going to use the ones that are given rather than adding along on the bottom, so I don't have to take up too much room. But it doesn't matter. Again, you can just add numbers down on the bottom of the table. Missed a 0 here. Okay. So I have my table, and so it says graph the data once we fill in the table and label the axis. So we've already labeled the axes, and so I'm going to round each one of these numbers just to 1 decimal place, and then go ahead and graph those points. All right, I have not connected my points yet because we need to have that discussion whether the graph is discrete or continuous, because that tells us in terms of whether or not we're going to connect or not. So again, discrete and continuous is determined based on whether or not we can have partial units or fractional units that make sense. So is it possible to have years broken down into reasonable units? Sure, we have months and days. Is the percent of women, can that be partial? Can we have part of a percent, or do they have to be all whole percents? Well, from our numbers, we do know that we can always have part of a percent. So we do know that this is going to be continuous, and it's continuous because both because both the years and the percent can be partial and make sense. So this time, so when I connect, I'm going to connect, but I'm going to connect it and let it just flow all the way through so I can see kind of my whole progression through the whole graph. Okay, so I kind of have that graph as I'm looking at it. Now, the graph on Desmos, we don't see that as of yet. So right now we want to figure out what we're going to need to do to make the graph on Desmos look like the graph that we have that we hand drew. So we were given what we call the window or the axes and how it was scaled. So if we look down in part C, the x-axis, so we want to know which values would you use to display the same graph as that we have going on in part A. So on the x-axis, what would be the value, and I'm going to, so this value right here, and this value right here are what control our x-axis in terms of Desmos. And so the x-axis, so it looks like here's 0, 0 as always. It looks like we're counting by 10. So I'm going to put in -10 because this is exactly what we're going to do in Desmos. And this goes to 110. And the step, so again, this is the least on the horizontal axis, and then the greatest or the most again on the horizontal axis. And then step means what is it scaled by or counting by. So in other words, what is the tick marks valued as? And we said it was valued at 10. We're going to do the same thing looking at the vertical axis. So the vertical axis is starting at 0 and goes up to 40. We start at 0, we go up to 40, and it looks like we're counting by fives. So 0 to 40, and we count by fives. And so this time you're going to go to the wrench and adjust the window. So if I go to the wrench, it's going to be over here on the right, or it's at the top if you're on your phone. And so halfway down, see it says -1.52 and 38.48. So we're going to change these to -10 and 110. Count by tens. And then the y-axis, or our output axes, we went from 0 to 40. And we counted by fives. And now all I'm going to do is just click off of the graph so I can see the same graph as what I was looking at before that I hand drew. Now I have that same graph.